The carriage door slammed shut, sealing Lady Elara Vance's fate. She was marrying a man she'd never met, the formidable Duke of Rylston, to settle a debt that wasn't hers. Her reputation, shattered by a vicious rumour, was bought and paid for. She was now a duchess. But as she stood in the cold, cavernous hall of Rylston Abbey, her new husband, Alistair Thorne, turned to her. His eyes, the colour of winter ice, held no warmth, no welcome. He gave his first command as her husband, and with those few, quiet words, he destroyed the last fragment of hope she had. The scandal had broken over Vance Manor like a summer thunderstorm, sudden, violent, and utterly ruinous. Lady Elara Vance, at 20, had been considered the most promising debutante of the season. Her father, Lord Geoffrey Vance, however, had a weakness that ran deeper than his lineage: the gaming tables. He had, in a single night of drunken bravado, wagered and lost not just his fortune, but his daughter's hand in marriage to the one man in England who inspired universal revulsion: Lord Marcus Croft. Croft was a man who collected things, art, debts, and, it was whispered, ruined young women. When Lord Vance inevitably defaulted, Croft arrived at the manor, not with bailiffs, but with a special license. The ensuing scene had been chaotic. Elara's mother, the frail Lady Eleanor, had collapsed. Elara, defending her home, had been found in a supposed compromising position with Croft. In reality, she had been pushing him from her private study. But the servants talked, Croft's men talked, and by noon the next day, London society had devoured Lady Elara Vance whole. She was ruined, unmarriageable. The family was trapped. Croft would have her, or he would have her father thrown in debtor's prison, leaving Elara and her mother to starve in the streets. They were checking out of the side door of their modest London townhouse, bags in hand, when the carriage bearing the Rylstone crest arrived. Alistair Thorne, the Duke of Rylston, didn't knock. His man, a severe-looking secretary named Mr. Hemlock, simply opened the door. The Duke was a legend, and not a kind one. He was known as the Iron Duke. He had inherited a nearly bankrupt title at 25, and, through sheer, ruthless efficiency and a rumoured lack of a heart, had transformed it into one of the most powerful estates in the country. He was 35, a widower, and according to the papers, completely devoid of sentiment. He stood in their crumbling drawing room, his towering frame making the ceiling seem impossibly low. He was not handsome in the classical sense. His features were too harsh, his jaw too severe, but he radiated a power that was suffocating. "Lord Vance," Alistair Thorne said. His voice was a low rumble, devoid of inflection. "You owe Lord Croft £40,000. You also owe your creditors another 20. You are, in short, finished." Lord Vance, a man broken, could only nod, his face grey. "I am in need of a wife," the Duke continued, as if discussing the weather. "I require an heir. My solicitors inform me your daughter, despite recent events, possesses a pedigree that is acceptable. Her reputation is, of course, destroyed. Therefore she has no value on the marriage market, which makes her affordable." Elara felt the blood drain from her face. He was discussing her like livestock. "Here is my offer," the Duke said, turning his cold grey eyes on Elara for the first time. She resisted the urge to flinch. "I will settle all your debts, in full. Lord Croft will trouble you no more. Your wife, Lady Eleanor, will have access to my physicians in Bath. You will be given a small but respectable allowance and a cottage in the countryside, far from London. In return, I will marry your daughter. Today." "Today?" Elara whispered, the word catching in her throat. "I do not waste time, madam," he replied. The special license is in my carriage. The alternative, I believe, is Lord Croft. The choice is yours." It wasn't a choice. It was a rescue, but the lifeboat was a frozen glacier. She looked at her weeping mother, her pathetic father. She was saving her name, her family's name, by sacrificing herself. "I accept," Elara said, her voice shaking but firm. The wedding was a mockery. It took place in a dusty, empty church near the docks. The only witnesses were Mr. Hemlock and a bewildered verger. Elara wore her simple travelling dress. Alistair wore his severe black travelling coat. He did not smile. He did not touch her hand until he was forced to slide a heavy, cold gold band onto her finger. The words, "Till death do us part," sounded like a prison sentence. The carriage ride to Rylston Abbey was 5 hours of agonizing silence. Alistair Thorne read ledgers. Elara watched the English countryside blur past, each milestone marking another step away from her life, her youth, her hope. Rylston Abbey was not a house. It was a monument, a vast Gothic masterpiece of grey stone and innumerable windows that stared down at them like judging eyes. It was imposing, magnificent, and as cold as its master. The staff was assembled in the cavernous main hall. They lined up like soldiers, their faces impassive, led by a formidable housekeeper, Mrs. Davies, who looked carved from the same grey stone as the Abbey. "Your Grace," Mrs. Davies curtsied, her eyes fixed on Alistair, completely ignoring Elara. "Mrs. Davies, this is the new Duchess," Alistair stated, his voice echoing in the marble hall. "She will be taking the East Wing chambers." Elara frowned. "The East Wing? Not the main Duchess's suite?" Alistair seemed to read her thought. "Come." He didn't offer his arm. He simply turned and walked up the grand staircase. Elara, her legs aching, picked up her skirts and followed. He led her down a long, portrait-lined gallery to the West Wing. He stopped before a set of imposing double doors. "These," he said, "are the Duchess's chambers." Elara felt a tiny, foolish flicker of relief. Perhaps she had misheard. He did not open the doors. He gestured to a large, looming portrait on the wall beside them. It was of a woman, astonishingly beautiful, with raven-black hair and eyes of startling sapphire blue. She was draped in a gown of the exact same shade. She was laughing, but her beauty was sharp, almost cruel. "My late wife, Lady Isabella," Alistair said. His voice was flat, but Elara thought she detected a faint vibration. "These were her rooms. They are not to be disturbed. They will remain as she left them. A memorial." He turned and pointed to a smaller, single door further down the hall, in the wing that branched off to the east. "Those are your chambers. They are sufficient." Elara's heart, already bruised, began to sink. She was not a wife. She was an inconvenient necessity, housed in the guest quarters. He stepped closer to her then. He was so tall, he blocked the light from the candelabra. She could smell the cold night air on his coat and something sharper, like steel. "You are my wife in name, madam. You will provide me an heir. That is the bargain we have struck. But I will have my terms. I have my first command for you, as your husband." Elara braced herself, expecting something cruel, something intimate, something humiliating. He looked from her face to the portrait of Isabella, then back again. "You will never wear the colour blue," he said, his voice dangerously soft. "Not in any shade. Not in a gown, not in a ribbon, not in a jewel. It was her colour. I will not have you attempt to replace her. You will not mimic her. You will be adequate. You will be sufficient. That is all I require. Do you understand me?" Elara's world tilted. This wasn't a command about her duties. It wasn't a restriction on her allowance or her movements. It was a profound, personal rejection. He was barring her from a colour. He was telling her, in no uncertain terms, that she was a pale shadow, a placeholder, and that her only duty was to be invisible, to not disturb the sacred memory of the woman he truly loved. She had married him to save her name, but his very first command ensured she would never truly have one here. She was not the Duchess of Rylston. She was merely the woman who was not Isabella. Tears pricked her eyes, hot and sharp, but she refused to let them fall. She would not cry. Not in front of him. "Perfectly," Elara said, her voice a cold, brittle thing. "I understand perfectly, Your Grace." The East Wing chambers were, as Alistair had promised, sufficient. They were also cold, furnished in a style 20 years out of date, and possessed a tangible air of disuse. They faced north, receiving no direct sunlight, and looked out over a barren, formal courtyard. The main Duchess's chambers in the West Wing, Elara knew, faced the magnificent, sprawling southern gardens. It was a snub as deliberate as it was petty. Her first weeks at Rylston Abbey settled into a pattern of profound, crushing isolation. The staff, meticulously managed by Mrs. Davies, were polite to a fault, but their deference was coated in ice. They called her Your Grace, but their eyes were vacant, their movements betraying a deeper loyalty. They were Isabella's staff. Elara was an usurper. Mrs. Davies, in particular, seemed to find fault in everything Elara did. When Elara suggested a change to the dinner menu, Mrs. Davies replied, "Her Ladyship, Lady Isabella, always preferred the French service, Your Grace." When Elara asked for a fire to be lit in her sitting room's hearth, Mrs. Davies's eyebrow lifted. "Lady Isabella," she said, her voice thin, "was never prone to the cold." Elara was a prisoner in a castle, a ghost haunting her own home. She had been bought to save her family, but in doing so, she had been erased. Her husband was an even more remote figure. Alistair Thorne was a man of relentless, punishing routine. He rose before dawn, spent his day in his study or riding his estates, and dined with her at precisely 8 o'clock. These dinners were masterpieces of silent torture. They sat at opposite ends of a 30-foot mahogany table, the vast distance illuminated by a forest of candles. The only sounds were the precise, maddening clink of silver on porcelain. Alistair did not speak. He did not ask about her day. He did not comment on the food or the weather. He simply ate, his focus absolute, his presence a leaden weight in the room. Elara found herself studying him, searching for any crack in the iron facade. His hands were large, capable, his dark hair touched with silver at the temples. He was, she had to admit, a physically powerful man. But his grey eyes were always guarded, always assessing, always cold. She tried, in the first week, to breach the silence. "The library is magnificent, Your Grace," she offered one evening, her voice sounding unnaturally loud in the cavernous dining hall. He paused, his fork halfway to his mouth. He looked at her, as if she had just begun speaking in ancient Greek. "It is functional," he replied, and returned to his meal. The silence that followed was even more profound, more humiliating than before. She never tried to start a conversation again. The only flicker of humanity she encountered was in the form of Alistair's younger brother, Mr. Julian Thorne. Julian arrived one afternoon, unannounced, bursting into the morning room, where Elara was miserably failing at a piece of embroidery. "Good God, you must be the new Duchess," he'd exclaimed, his smile as bright and warm as Alistair's was cold. "And they've stuck you in the north-facing rooms. How utterly like him." Julian was everything Alistair was not. He was fair-haired, charming, and possessed an easy, flirtatious manner. He treated Elara not as a sufficient piece of a bargain, but as a woman. "Julian Thorne," he said, bowing low over her hand and holding it just a moment too long. "The superfluous brother. I do hope you'll let me provide some small distraction from the crushing boredom of my brother's company." Elara, starved for any kind of kindness, found herself smiling. "Lady Elara," she corrected, then blushed. "That is the Duchess of Rylston. A pleasure, Mr. Thorne." "Oh, please, call me Julian. Mr. Thorne is what my creditors call me," he laughed. Julian became her shadow for the next several days. He showed her the hidden paths in the gardens. He played the pianoforte for her. He told her scandalous stories about their neighbors. He was a balm to her wounded spirit. He also seemed deeply, almost protectively, sympathetic to her plight. "You mustn't mind Alistair," he said one afternoon, as they sat by the lake. "He wasn't always this solid block of granite." "He speaks of his late wife often," Elara ventured, testing the waters. Julian's face darkened, the easy charm replaced by a flash of genuine anger. "He doesn't speak of her. He worships a memory of her. Isabella. She was an angel, truly luminous, and he destroyed her." Elara's breath caught. "Destroyed her? The servants all say, everyone says he adored her." "He suffocated her," Julian snapped, tossing a stone into the water. "He's a man of rules, Elara, of commands. He demands control. Isabella was a free spirit. She loved music and laughter and colour." He gave Elara a pointed, sad look, especially blue. She loved it. Alistair thought her spirit was a flaw to be corrected. He drove her to her death. He may as well have pushed her from that window himself. The rumours Elara knew were that Isabella had fallen from her window in the West Wing, a tragic accident. Julian's words painted a much darker picture. "He keeps that wing locked," Julian continued, his voice low and conspiratorial. "Like a shrine. But I think it's a tomb. He's hiding his guilt, Elara. He's a monster. A cold, ruthless monster, and I am so very sorry he has trapped you here." Julian's words planted a seed of true fear. She had seen her husband as cold, as heartbroken, as cruel, but not as a killer. Not as a man who could drive his wife to suicide. That night, at dinner, Elara looked at Alistair with new eyes. She watched his precise, controlled movements, his impassive face. Was this the focus of a businessman, or the chilling self-control of a monster? Her isolation felt suddenly less like a snub and more like a strategy. He was keeping her separate. He was controlling her. A small, defiant spark ignited in her. She had been commanded to be sufficient. She had been commanded to avoid Blue. She had been commanded to stay away from the West Wing. She thought of Julian's sympathetic eyes, his warning. She thought of the beautiful, laughing Isabella in the portrait, and the tragic story of her death. Elara's gaze drifted from her husband to the far end of the hall, toward the corridor that led to the West Wing. The door was always locked. Mrs. Davies held the key. She was trapped, yes, but she was not stupid, and she was no longer content to be sufficient. Her husband had locked away his heart, his past, and his secrets. Elara, with nothing else to do, decided she would find the key. The first hint that Julian's story was not the whole truth came from a source as unlikely as it was terrifying. Elara, growing bolder, had begun to explore the house, avoiding the servants and the vigilant Mrs. Davies. She was in the library, ostensibly looking for a novel, when she brushed against a section of shelving. A small, leather-bound book fell to the floor. It was not a library book. It was a diary. Her hands trembled as she opened it. The handwriting was neat, precise. The personal journal of M. Davies. It was the housekeeper's diary. Elara knew she should put it back. It was a monstrous invasion of privacy. But a phrase on the open page caught her eye. October 14th, 1838. Another terrible night. Her ladyship screaming again. Not at the Duke, but at Mr. Julian. He is too familiar with her, I fear. He encourages her vapours. The Duke is blind to it. He thinks her delicate. I think her wicked. Elara's blood ran cold. Wicked, not delicate, not an angel, and screaming at Julian. She kept reading, her heart pounding. October 20th, 1838. I found a bottle of laudanum hidden in her ladyship's vanity. She is taking far too much. And the Duke. He is so patient. He reads to her. He cancels his meetings in London to sit with her. He blames himself for her sadness. But it is not sadness. It is a poison. And I fear Mr. Julian is feeding it to her. October 26th, 1838. The Duke commanded that no more blue gowns be ordered for her ladyship. He says the colour seems to agitate her. She had a fit this morning, tore apart a new silk gown from Paris because the shade was wrong. She blamed the maid, Sarah, and struck her. The Duke discharged Sarah, with a pension, thank God, to protect her. He told her ladyship the girl had been clumsy. He is always covering for her, always protecting her. Elara sank onto the library steps, the small book falling into her lap. Everything was a lie. Alistair hadn't forbidden Isabella blue. He'd tried to remove it because it agitated her. He wasn't a monster who drove her to her death. He was a man desperately trying to manage an unstable, volatile wife. And Julian, he encourages her vapours. He is too familiar. Julian had lied. He had painted his brother as a villain to gain Elara's sympathy. Why? And then, the most terrible thought, Alistair's command to Elara. You will not wear blue. It wasn't a command of mourning. It wasn't about protecting Isabella's memory. It was a desperate, panicked attempt to prevent history from repeating itself. He saw Elara, another beautiful, dark-haired woman, and his broken, traumatized mind had issued the one command he thought might keep her safe. He was trying to protect Elara from the same madness that had consumed Isabella. Her heart didn't break. It ached. It ached with a profound, terrifying understanding. She looked up. Alistair Thorne, the Duke of Rylstone, was standing in the doorway of the library, his face a mask of thunder. He had seen her, and she was holding the diary. "What?" he said, his voice a low, lethal snarl. "Do you think you are doing?" The library, which Elara had once seen as a sanctuary, suddenly felt like a trap. The air crackled with a tension so thick it was hard to breathe. Alistair Thorne did not move from the doorway, his large frame blocking the only exit. He was a predator poised to strike, and Elara, frozen on the steps, was his prey. "Your Grace," Elara began, her voice a reedy whisper. She stood, the small diary held in her hand like a shield. I was looking for a book." This fell. Alistair's eyes, chips of grey flint, flickered from her face to the diary. "And having it fall," he said, taking a slow, deliberate step into the room, "obliged you to read it?" Elara faltered. A lie would be pointless. He already knew. She lifted her chin, the blood rushing to her cheeks. "Yes, I read it. I read Mrs. Davies's words." He took another step. The library was vast, but he was shrinking the space between them with terrifying speed. "You, a guest in my home for mere weeks, have seen fit to rifle through the private effects of my staff and pry into matters that are not your concern." A guest? The word, so cold and accurate, stung Elara more than his anger. "I am your wife, your grace, your duchess, and yet I am treated like a stranger. I am locked out of my own home, commanded not to wear a simple colour, and fed lies by everyone. Lies!" He stopped, perhaps 10 feet from her. "What lies?" "The lies about Isabella," Elara cried, her own anger, born of fear and confusion, finally erupting. "The servants, your brother, they speak of an angel, a saint you drove to her death with your coldness. But this," she held up the diary, "this speaks of a woman who was ill, a woman who was cruel, who struck her maid." Alistair's face went utterly blank, a stillness more frightening than his rage. "You will give me the book." It was not a request. She was obsessed with blue, Elara pushed on, her heart hammering against her ribs. It agitated her. You forbade it not to mourn her, but to manage her. You didn't drive her to her death. You were trying to protect her. He crossed the remaining distance in 2 long strides. He did not snatch the book. He simply put his hand out, palm up. Elara flinched, but he didn't touch her. He just waited. His silence was a physical force, demanding obedience. Trembling, Elara placed the diary in his hand. He did not look at it. His gaze was locked on her, and it was unreadable. It was not anger. It was exhaustion. A profound, bone-deep weariness that seemed to pull at every line on his face. "Julian?" he said, his voice flat. "He spoke to you of Isabella?" He said you were a monster," Elara admitted, her voice small. "He said you suffocated her, that you were hiding your guilt by locking the West Wing." Alistair turned away from her, walking to the massive fireplace. He stared into the empty hearth. "He would," the Duke murmured, more to himself than to her. "Of course he would." He turned back, his expression shuttered once more. "You will stay away from my brother, your grace. His easy charm is a poison he has been dispensing for years. He is a gambler, a liar, and a leech. He only values what is not his." The implication hung in the air, heavy and dark. He only values what is not his. Was he talking about his money or his wife? "And what of the West Wing?" Elara pressed, emboldened by her discovery. "Why is it locked? If you were not hiding your guilt, what are you hiding?" "My shame, madam," he roared, and this time the anger was unmistakable. It exploded from him, a physical blow that made Elara stumble back. He instantly regained control, his hands clenching into white-knuckled fists at his sides. "That wing," he said, his voice now dangerously quiet, "is not a shrine. It is a gravestone. It is a monument to my own colossal failure. My failure to see what she was. My failure to protect her from herself. And my failure—" He stopped, his jaw working. "My failure to protect my family from the consequences. It is locked because I will not have the world see the squalor of her end. It is locked because the past is a disease, and that room is the heart of the infection. You will not go there." He was breathing heavily, his chest rising and falling under his waistcoat. Elara had, for the first time, seen the man behind the Iron Duke. She had seen the raw, gaping wound he carried. "You commanded me," Elara said, her voice soft now, "not to wear blue. Was it because of her? Because it agitated her?" Alistair looked at her, and his eyes were filled with a bleakness that mirrored her own isolation. "When I first saw you," he said, his voice rough, "in that hovel in London, you were wearing a simple blue ribbon in your hair. You were terrified. But you stood up to me. You looked me in the eye and accepted a bargain that would destroy you, all to save those 2 pathetic, to save your family." Elara stared. She had forgotten that. A small, faded blue ribbon she had worn for weeks. "When I brought you here," he continued, "I saw you standing against the backdrop of this house, and all I could think was that I was doing it again. I was trapping another woman here. I had trapped Isabella with my expectations, and now I was trapping you with my bargain. The command. It was not for her. It was for me. It was a foolish, clumsy attempt to draw a line, to separate the past from the present, to remind myself that you were not her." He shook his head, a gesture of self-loathing. It was a cruel thing to do, and it was insufficient. He used her word of humiliation. He had felt it too. He turned to the fire again. "Mrs. Davies will be spoken to. Her privacy will be respected from now on. By both of us." He tossed the diary onto the hearth. "I expect you to do the same for my brother. Stay away from him." He started to walk out of the library. "Alistair," Elara said. He stopped, his back to her. She had used his given name. "She wasn't an angel," Elara said, her voice stronger. "And you are not a monster. I am no longer afraid of you." He was silent for a long moment. "Perhaps you should be, Your Grace," he said, without turning. "Perhaps you should be." He left the library, leaving Elara alone with the diary on the hearth and 1,000 new questions. Julian was the liar. Isabella was the true monster. And Alistair was a man in agony. But the story wasn't complete. If Isabella was the volatile one, and Alistair was the protector, then how did she end up dead on the pavement below the West Wing window? What truly happened on that terrible night that Mrs. Davies had been too afraid to write about? Julian had lied to her, painting his brother as a killer. Alistair had commanded her to stay away from him. This was no longer just a family tragedy. It was a dangerous, living secret. And Julian, the charming, smiling, sympathetic Julian, was at the very center of it. Elara realized she was not just in a gilded cage. She was in a predator's web, and she had just alerted the spider. The house grew colder. After the confrontation in the library, a new, brittle tension settled over Rylston Abbey. Alistair retreated even further, his absence a palpable presence. He no longer dined with Elara. His meals were taken in his study, the excuse of estate business, delivered by a nervous footman. Mrs. Davies, when Elara passed her in the hall, would drop a deep curtsy, her face pale and her eyes darting away. Elara knew the housekeeper was terrified, not of her, but of what she knew. Elara was, for the first time, truly alone. But her isolation no longer felt like a punishment. It felt like a tactical error. She had aligned herself, however unintentionally, with Alistair. And in doing so, she had made an enemy of Julian. Julian did not leave the Abbey. To the contrary, he seemed to make himself even more at home, his laughter echoing in the halls, a cheerful, chilling counterpoint to the house's oppressive gloom. He sought Elara out, his manner unchanged. "My dear Duchess," he found her in the gallery, "you look positively haunted. Has my brother's charming company finally done you in? You should come riding with me. We'll put some colour back in your cheeks." His casual audacity was staggering. I am not feeling well, Julian," Elara said, moving away from him. "Ah, is that what he told you? That I'm a bad influence?" Julian laughed, a bright, unconcerned sound. "He's predictable. I'll give him that. He can't stand for anyone to have a moment of joy. He believes happiness is a personal failing." He stepped closer, his voice dropping. "He did the same with Isabella. He tried to poison me in her eyes. He was jealous, Elara. He knew she and we understood each other. We had a bond he could never be a part of. You were close? Elara asked, her skin crawling. She remembered Mrs. Davies's words. He is too familiar with her. We were kindred spirits, Julian said softly, his eyes full of feigned sadness. Trapped in this mausoleum with him. Don't let him do to you what he did to her. Don't let him poison you against me. I am the only friend you have here. He was good. He was so very good. He twisted the truth, seeding it with just enough genuine emotion to make it plausible. He was painting Alistair's protection of Isabella as jealousy. I must go, Elara said, pulling her shawl tighter. Mrs. Davies is waiting for me. Of course, Julian said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. The loyal wife. But be careful, Elara. Loyalty to a tyrant is a dangerous game. Elara fled. Julian's words were a threat, plain and simple. He was testing her, seeing where her loyalties now lay. She had to know what was in the West Wing. Alistair had called it a gravestone, a place of squalor. Julian had called it a tomb, a place where Alistair hid his guilt. The truth, Elara was certain, was in that locked room. She couldn't ask Alistair. He had forbidden it. She couldn't get the key from Mrs. Davies, who now guarded the key ring on her belt as if it were the crown jewels. Elara would have to find another way. Her search for an answer led her to the stables, and to the one person on the estate who seemed to fear no one. Thomas, the head groundskeeper. Thomas was ancient, his face a map of wrinkles, and he had served the Rylstone family since before Alistair was born. She found him pruning the roses in the frozen garden, his shears snapping decisively in the cold air. Thomas, she began, pulling her cloak tight. Your Grace, he grunted, not looking up from a particularly stubborn rosebush. You were here when Lady Isabella was alive, weren't you? The shears stopped. Thomas slowly straightened up, his back cracking. He looked at her with eyes as old and grey as the Abbey itself. I was. People say she was an angel. Thomas gave a dry, humourless chuckle. An angel she was. If angels scream at horses for looking at 'em wrong. If angels throw plates of food at servant girls. He spat on the frozen ground. She was beautiful, I'll give you that. Beautiful as a snow leopard, and just as mean. This was it. The truth, raw and unvarnished. But the Duke, Elara whispered. He loved her. Loved her, Thomas scoffed. He pitied her. He married her for her family's connections. She married him for his money. A bargain, just like any other. Only he didn't know her family was riddled with, well, fragility. He spent the next 5 years trying to put a broken vase back together, while she was busy smashing every other good thing in the house. What about Mr. Julian? Thomas's face darkened. Aye, Mr. Julian. He was here, buzzing round her like a fly on honey. He liked that she was broken. He liked to smash things too. Elara's blood chilled. Thomas, the night she died. What happened? The old man's eyes unfocused, looking past Elara to the west wing, its windows dark and blank. Stormy night, wind howling like a banshee. I was in the stables, seeing to a sick mare, heard the screaming. Thought it was the wind at first. Screaming? Elara pressed. Whose? Hers, he said, and his, not the Duke, the other one, Mr. Julian. They was fighting, an awful row. Heard a crash, like glass breaking. Then, just the wind. And the Duke? Where was he? In London, Thomas said simply. On business, got the news by rider, rode all night, didn't sleep for a week. When he came back, he wasn't the same man. He was ruthless, Elara offered. No, Thomas said, shaking his head. Empty. He was just empty. He locked that wing up the day after the funeral, told us to never speak of it again. Elara's world had just been rewritten. Alistair wasn't even here. It was Julian. Julian and Isabella. A fight, a crash, and then silence. Julian hadn't just lied to her. He had framed his brother for a death he himself had caused. Whether by accident or by design, Julian was responsible, and he was still in the house. Elara knew what she had to do. She couldn't wait for Alistair's permission. She couldn't fear his anger. She had to get into that room. She had to find the proof. She waited until after midnight, when the house was as silent as a tomb. She didn't bother with Mrs. Davies's keys. She went to the garden shed, her slippers soaked with dew. She retrieved a cold chisel and a small mallet. She had watched Thomas use them to open a stubborn cellar door. The lock on the west wing was old, heavy brass, but Elara was not the same woman who had arrived at Rylston. She was no longer a debutante. She was a duchess, fighting for her home and for the man who was her husband. She jammed the chisel into the tiny gap between the door and the frame. The first strike of the mallet on the chisel was a deafening crack in the silence. She froze, listening. Nothing. Only the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall below. She struck again, and again, leveraging her weight. The old wood splintered. With a final desperate shove, the lock gave way. The door groaned open onto a passage of absolute darkness. It smelled of dust, of rot, and of something else, something like stale wine and old perfume. Elara lit the candle she had brought. She held it high, and she stepped inside. The air in the west wing was colder than the rest of the house, heavy and stagnant. Elara's small candle flame flickered, casting long, dancing shadows that leaped at her from every corner. The wing was not, as she had imagined, preserved in perfect, pristine order. It was a scene of utter devastation. Alistair had not been lying. This was no shrine. It was a battlefield. She entered what must have been the main sitting room. Furniture was overturned. A delicate chair lay on its side. One leg snapped. A vase of long-dead, blackened flowers had been smashed against the wall, the dark stain spreading across the faded silk wallpaper. "My God," Elara whispered, her voice absorbed by the heavy draperies which were drawn tight against the world. She moved deeper into the suite, her footfalls muffled by the thick carpet. She passed into the dressing room. Gowns, silks and velvets, mostly in shades of blue and green, had been torn from the wardrobe. They lay in a heap on the floor, slashed and ripped, as if by a madman. A vanity mirror was shattered, the silver backing glinting like spiders' webs in the candlelight. This was not the work of a grieving husband. This was rage. This was violence. Elara felt a growing dread. Thomas had said Julian and Isabella were fighting. Had Julian done this, or had Isabella, in a fit of laudanum-fueled madness, destroyed her own rooms? She finally entered the bedchamber. This was the heart of the darkness. The room was dominated by a massive four-poster bed, its hangings torn. But Elara's eyes were drawn to the far side of the room. The window. It was a set of tall French doors leading to a small stone balcony. One of the glass panes was shattered, a jagged, star-shaped hole gaping open to the night air. The wind outside whistled through it, a low, mournful sound. This was where she died. This was where Isabella fell. Elara walked toward it, her shoes crunching on tiny shards of glass. She could see the pavement of the terrace, 3 stories below. She saw something on the floor, half hidden beneath the edge of a heavy Aubusson rug. She knelt, her candle held low. It was a book, a small, elegant volume bound in green leather, just like the diary she had found in the library. But this one was different. This one had a small, gold-tooled eye on the cover. Isabella. Elara's fingers trembled so violently she could barely open it. This was Isabella's diary. The first entries were mundane. Notes on fashion, complaints about the weather, petty gripes about Alistair's obsessive work. Alistair is in London again. He leaves me here to die of boredom. He is so dreadfully dull. He thinks reading to me will cure my nerves. What a fool. But as the entries progressed, they grew darker, more frantic. They became obsessed with one subject: Julian. Julian understands me. He knows I am a creature of passion, not a ledger book like his brother. He says I deserve more. He says I deserve everything. He brought me the laudanum. He says it will calm the beast. Alistair is a fool. He sees nothing. Julian and I, we have a plan. Alistair's constant work is a blessing. It makes him predictable. Julian says we could be free. We could have all of this. All it would take is one small push. Elara's stomach churned. One small push. Were they planning to kill Alistair? She flipped further, the pages growing stained and the handwriting more erratic. Julian is growing careless. He is too eager. He wants me to add the powder to Alistair's wine tonight. But Alistair is not even here. He is in London. Julian is a fool. He wants the money now, but he has no patience. He frightens me. He is demanding. He says I owe him. He says I am his. But I am no one's, not Alistair's, not his. He thinks I will trade one master for another. He does not know me at all. Then, the final entry. The date. The night she died. The handwriting was a near illegible scrawl, the ink smudged as if by tears or wine. He knows. Julian knows I have my own plans. I told him I wouldn't share. It is mine. The Rylestone's name. The money. It is all mine. He came to my room. He is drunk. He is demanding the money Alistair left for me. He says I am a mad woman. He says he will have me committed, just like my mother. He says Alistair will believe him. He is right. Alistair will believe him. He is shaking me. He is... The entry ended there, in a long, jagged smear of ink, as if the pen had been torn from her hand. Elara dropped the diary as if it were on fire. It all slotted into place, a horrifying, perfect puzzle. Isabella and Julian were lovers. They had conspired, likely, to murder Alistair. But their greed and paranoia had turned them against each other. Julian, drunk and enraged, had come to her room that night. They had fought. Thomas had heard it. And in the ensuing struggle, Isabella, volatile, terrified, and likely high on laudanum, had gone through the window. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't suicide. It was manslaughter. At best. Julian had not just framed his brother with lies. He had let his brother take the blame. Let him build this wall of ruthless efficiency. Let him carry the shame of a wife who killed herself, all to cover his own monstrous crime. So the little mouse has a taste for dark places. Elara screamed. Julian Thorne was standing in the doorway of the bedroom, silhouetted against the candlelight from the hall. His face was in shadow, but his voice was light, almost conversational. "I must applaud your initiative, Duchess," he said, taking a step into the room. "Not even I have been in here since that night. Alistair had it locked up so tight." "You..." Elara scrambled to her feet, backing away toward the broken window. "You killed her." "Killed her?" Julian laughed, a short, ugly sound. "My dear, Isabella was a force of nature. No one killed her. She simply imploded. And I was unfortunately nearby when it happened." He strolled into the room, his eyes scanning the devastation with an almost nostalgic air. "Ah, yes. She did have a temper. Threw that bust of Caesar at my head. Missed me by an inch. He looked at Elara, his charm completely gone, his eyes flat and reptilian. You should have stayed in your pretty cold room, Elara. You should have been sufficient. Alistair knows, Elara bluffed, her mind racing. He knows what you are. He suspects, Julian corrected. He's always suspected. My brother's great flaw is that he requires proof. He's a man of ledgers and facts. I am a man of opportunity, and he could never prove anything. Because to do so, he would have to admit his angel wife was a scheming, poisonous whore who was plotting to murder him. He lunged and grabbed her wrist. His grip was like iron. He locked this room to protect the family name, to protect his own pride. He would never, ever admit the truth. He chose to be the monster in the story. It was easier. "Let me go," Elara cried, struggling. "And now you," he sighed, pulling her closer. "You've ruined everything. You had to go digging. You had to go and fix him. He's been different these last few days. Stronger. All because of you." He sniffed her hair. "He's not the only one who values what isn't his." "He will hear me," she shrieked, stamping on his foot. Julian roared in pain and backhanded her. The blow was brutal, sending Elara crashing to the floor, her head striking the leg of the overturned chair. The candle skittered away, its flame extinguishing, plunging the room into near total darkness, lit only by the weak moonlight from the broken window. "You should have just worn the blue, Elara," Julian panted, advancing on her. "You should have been a good, quiet little wife." "She is not your wife." The voice came from the doorway. It was not a shout. It was a low, guttural promise of death. Alistair Thorne stood where Julian had been, but he was no longer the empty, controlled Duke. In his hand he held a fireplace poker, gripped so tightly his knuckles were white. He was a figure of pure, undiluted rage. "Alistair!" Julian scrambled back, his bravado vanishing. "Alistair, wait! It's not what you think! She's mad! She's just like Isabella! She attacked me!" Alistair didn't look at his brother. His eyes were on Elara, who was pushing herself up, her lip bleeding. "Elara!" he commanded, his voice shaking. "Go! Now!" "No!" Elara cried, grabbing the one thing she could find, Isabella's discarded diary. "Alistair, they were plotting to kill you. He killed her." Alistair's gaze finally snapped to his brother. The revelation, the proof, seemed to hit him like a physical blow. The betrayal was absolute. "You," Alistair choked on the word, "you were going to murder me." "She was mad," Julian shrieked, grabbing a heavy silver candlestick from a side table. "She was lying. She was going to poison us both. I saved you. By throwing her from a window?" Alistair roared, advancing. "It was an accident!" Julian swung the candlestick. Alistair blocked it with the poker, the clang of metal on metal echoing like a gunshot. The fight was not a duel. It was a brutal, ugly brawl. Julian, fueled by panic, swung wildly. Alistair, fueled by years of repressed grief and a white-hot, righteous fury, was a machine. He was not the Iron Duke. He was a thunderstorm. He was an avalanche. He struck Julian in the knee. The crack of bone was sickening. Julian screamed and collapsed. Alistair stood over him, the poker raised, his chest heaving. For one terrifying second, Elara thought he was going to kill him. He was going to become the monster Julian had always claimed he was. "Alistair, no!" Elara screamed. Don't! He's not worth it!" Alistair's arm trembled. The poker was aimed at his brother's skull. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by Julian's pathetic, pain-filled sobs. Slowly, agonizingly, Alistair lowered his arm. The poker clattered to the floor. He turned, his face ashen, and walked to Elara. He didn't touch her. He just looked at her bleeding lip, at the bruise forming on her cheek. He had protected his brother. He had protected his family name. He had hidden the truth for years, all to avoid this very moment, this very shame. "Is it true?" he whispered, his voice broken. "You are unhurt?" Elara reached up and, with a trembling hand, touched his cheek. "I am unhurt, Alistair." He closed his eyes, a single, hot tear escaping and tracing a path through the dust on his skin. It was the most human, most vulnerable, most beautiful thing she had ever seen. The spell was broken by a choked gasp from the doorway. Mrs. Davies stood there, a candelabra held high, flanked by 2 footmen. She had clearly heard the crash. Her eyes took in the scene. The weeping, broken Julian on the floor, the poker, the shattered Duchess, and her master, standing not in triumph, but in utter, heart-breaking defeat. "Your Grace," Mrs. Davies whispered, her face ashen. Alistair Thorne straightened. He pulled the Iron Duke's mask back into place, but the fit was wrong. It was cracked. "Mrs. Davies," he said, his voice hoarse but firm. "Send for the magistrate in the village." "Not the constable?" "The magistrate. Mr. Abernathy. Tell him there has been an incident at Rylston Abbey. Tell him the Duke of Rylston demands his presence to hear a confession." He looked down at his brother. The past, it seems, is no longer buried. It is time to air out this house. After the confrontation, Alistair, the Iron Duke, finally broke. He brought Elara to his own chambers, tending to her injuries and confessing his agonizing truth. He had known Julian was involved in Isabella's death, but he covered the crime to protect the Rylstone name, which he, as an outsider in his own family, cherished fiercely. He admitted he chose to be the cold monster to control Julian and preserve the legacy. He saw his command about the color blue as a foolish attempt to protect Elara from Julian's predatory nature, not as a tribute to Isabella. With the proof, Isabella's diary, and Elara's safety secured, Alistair summoned the magistrate. He confessed to the cover-up and ordered Julian's arrest, choosing truth over legacy. Elara knelt, reassuring him that he was the most honorable man she knew. As the sun rose, the great weight of his secret was lifted, leaving him exhausted, but free. The scandal exploded, but the public narrative soon shifted, painting Alistair as a heroic, long-suffering duke and Elara as the brave woman who brought truth to light. Internally, Rylstone Abbey was reborn. Alistair confessed the full truth to the staff, and they, led by Mrs. Davies, pledged their loyalty to Elara, their true Duchess. Alistair and Elara faced the world together, even travelling to London to refurnish the West Wing, which they had purged with fire. Weeks later, Alistair found Elara in the newly decorated room, now a bright, happy yellow. He told her he had one final request, that she teach him to be a husband, not a duke. He presented her with a brilliant blue sapphire necklace, damning his first cruel command. "It seems," the once ruthless duke smiled, "blue is my new favorite color." He offered his hand, and she took it. The story of Elara and Alistair wasn't a fairy tale. It was a story of survival. It proves that the deepest wounds can be healed, not by magic, but by courage. That a name, a reputation, is nothing compared to the truth. And that sometimes the most ruthless heart is just the one that's been broken the most. Theirs was a love forged in scandal, tempered by fire, and built, finally, on the foundations of truth. What did you think of Elara's courage? Have you ever misjudged someone as ruthless when they were just protecting themselves? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were moved by their story, please like this video. Share it with someone who loves a story of real passion. and be sure to subscribe for more historical dramas that feel like real life.